Okay, place your bets. Who's gonna win this fight? Hey there, my name is Salandrak, and welcome to the next to last episode of my Don't Starve Reign of Giants Wagstaff playthrough series. Last time we ended just as Wagstaff got pulled into Chapter 3 of Adventure Mode, and going into the recording session I had no idea what chapter we're going to be up against. So without further ado, let's find out. Two Worlds. The worst chapter to get for Chapter 3 if you're hoping to unlock Wes, but since I already have, no big deal. And wow, Maxwell is starting to look less than dapper. After his opening dialogue, spectacles get made and I start exploring my surroundings. Two Worlds consists of two large islands, one of which is a good place. Resource rich, endless autumn, where the days are long and the nights are extremely short. The other world, not so nice. Let's call it the bad place. Almost right away I find some beefalo, not that I'll need them, and then craft myself a backpack. The only way to get to the other world is to find a wormhole and or a sickly wormhole, so I'll likely have to explore a decent chunk of the good place before I can start finding the things. Gobblers are fun. Seriously, these guys never cease to amuse me. After gathering some basic supplies near my starter area, it's time to set off mapping the outline of the good place. Ooh, triple killer beehive. I don't think I've ever seen that before in the good place, and being focused on the bees, I totally missed the wormhole up in the corner of the screen. I continue up the coast where I get my first glimpse of the bad place, which is mostly swamp along with other nastiness. And up ahead I find a rocky land that has gold and Chester! He's great to have in this chapter, as I'll want to wear armor probably the whole time I'm in the bad place. Partway into dusk I find a fun set piece where lots of guardian pigs are protecting a shrine to Maxwell, as if he ever did anything for them. And then it's back towards the coast for more outlining while gathering more grass and twigs. Night arrives and I use a torch to light my way, and I'm really going to skip through the next little bit as it isn't terribly exciting. Midway through day 2 I've circled back to the beefalo savanna I found earlier. A little past that is a firehound set piece that I just ignore. Before dusk I find a touchstone and relieve it of all its pig heads. I find a few spiders, and as it's almost night of day 2, I've finished outlining the good place. So I start mapping the interior, starting with the area back behind the spawn camp. Just as night falls, I find an interesting boon, moggles, and a summer frest. The summer frest is basically a useless item, but the moggles are interesting. Since there are no caves in adventure mode, you can't craft them here, as there is no way to get glowberries. Likewise, there's no way to refuel them in adventure mode either. If I were any other character, I would still be happy to find them, as they could be useful in dangerous areas of Chapter 5. But since Wagstaff can just make Froggles, I just wear them this first night, and will likely leave them behind. Though the world does look pretty cool when you wear them in the daytime. Back up by camp, I finally notice the wormhole. Really nice to have it so close to camp. And since I really don't feel the need to stick around in this chapter any longer than is absolutely necessary, I head back to base, drop a crock pot, and start preparing to head to the bad place, not mapping the rest of the good place. Icebox also gets placed, but when I try to make a chest to store some of my excess belongings, I realize that I'd never learned how to bake them. So it looks like I'll need to gather some materials to make at least a science machine. Unfortunately, the basalt boulders are indestructible, and I haven't seen any mineable boulders on the map. But I do remember seeing a decent number of mole worms, which is another source of stone. First though, I mine the glaciers in the rocky land, which gets me half the 4 stone I need, and then I go looking for burrows to dig up. First volunteer is found up by the lumpy trees and gives me a 3rd stone, second volunteer gives me a flint, and then I get my 4th stone from the next one. All things considered, that worked out pretty well. I swing by Maxwell's Fanatics on my way back to camp, and this time manage to not get slapped, and map out the rest of the area while I'm at it, except right in the middle of the shrine. A pair of mole worms gets relocated by base in case I need them for anything else later, and then I place the science machine and build my storage chest. Extra stuff gets stored, I have some more fun with gobblers, and then I spend dusk and night making more meatballs and preparing to go to the bad place. Morning of day 5 arrives, I put on my log suit and then hop in the wormhole. Upon my arrival in the bad place, I find myself surrounded by Maxwell's tooth traps. These things only exist in adventure mode and will hit you for 60 damage if you step on them. Way back in the day they used to kill Chester, but it was later changed so that he doesn't trigger them, which is definitely a good thing here in the bad place. I start heading along the coast and bust out the divining rod and find that a thing is somewhere nearby. And it's even closer as I come across an area that has mineable boulders and lots of hound mounds. Did I mention that the bad place isn't very friendly? I mine one of the boulders, but too many hounds run over before I can pick everything up, so I run away until only 3 are following and then dispatch the doggos. Thanks for tanking one for me, Chester. My retreat put me further away from my thing though, so I head back towards the hound mounds, this time trying to keep my distance. A couple more gold veins get mined, and eventually I find the box thing, but have to run away from hounds again. Only one followed me this time though, and then I decide to take a breather and make some infroggles. Then it's back to exploring. Up the coast I find a large chessboard, another adventure mode exclusive. I once had one of these in the Darkness chapter that was chock full of clockworks, with a thing hiding somewhere in the middle. That run didn't end well. This one looks pretty empty though, and I just pass on through, finding a graveyard on the other side. Just before night I'm getting closer to another thing, and using infroggle vision I find the wooden circle thing not terribly far from the wormhole. Circling around the perimeter I find a Tallbird fighting with some merms, I grab a tentacle spike in a war zone, and then I watch as a tentacle takes out a Tallbird. I honestly wasn't sure which one would win. I get spanked grabbing the meat and see a walrus campsite? That's odd since this chapter doesn't have winter, but whatever. A little ways ahead I find the metal potato thing, and during dusk of day 6 I decide to make a shovel and start digging up blue caps. They're all over the place in the swamp and are useful raw for healing and hunger and restore 10 sanity when cooked. Crank thing is found a bit further up ahead, so now it's just the ring thing left to find. My inventory is a bit full though, so I ditch the garden gnome, then continue the search, finding the ring thing just after dawn on day 7. I take a pit stop, drop a campfire, and cook up a bunch of blue caps to get my sanity back up. I then eat a few raw for healing, then cook the rest to get the sanity back up again. Ring thing gets grabbed, and now I have everything I need to make the teleportado to the next chapter. As this is adventure mode, I don't feel compelled to completely map out the entire world, but I do head back along the coastline and finish mapping the perimeter of the island. Here's another interesting Maxwell statue set piece. Would be fun to hang out here when the merms are out. A little bit into dusk I decide, that's enough mapping for this world, and head up to the wooden circle thing. With double armor and a tentacle spike I start taking out the clockworks, but halfway through fighting them I hear the baying of hounds and decide to see if I can incite some violence. Teleportado gets assembled while waiting for the doggos to arrive, and they finally show up, and I eventually manage to get the hounds and knights to fight each other. One hound goes down pretty fast, but then one of the clockworks also falls, and it's 1v1, but the knight rushes in and delivers the killing blow. And then I finish it off with my tentacle spike. Teleportado gets turned on, but I'll need to go back to camp to grab some things and maybe pre-craft some stuff before moving on. But first I mine a few boulders, then grab some frog legs for filler and froggle bunwitches, and then use the sick wormhole to head back to the good place. These things are one-way trips and shrivel up and disappear once used, but are kind of fun. Back at camp, cooked blue caps get my sanity back up, froggle bunwitch gets made for healing, and while a second one is cooking I run up to the lumpy trees to burn them down for charcoal for a new pre-crafted crockpot. A new crockpot gets made, as well as a new icebox, and then on dawn of day 9 I grab my puffy vest, and then head over to the wormhole and hop in. Teleportado gets loaded up with pigskin, gold, walking stick, and puffy vest, and then it's onward to chapter 4. Now, you might be wondering why I've been keeping that puffy vest around, and the reason is that based on the chapters I've already had, I know that chapter 4 is going to start out cold. And sure enough, the game is afoot. Maxwell is still looking pretty creepy, puffy vest goes on immediately, and then spectacles get made so I can see the world. Nearby there's a chest with a few basic items and a campfire, but I won't be needing the winter hat. So while Wagstaff gets started gathering basic supplies, let's talk about this chapter. The game is afoot is kind of a fun one. It starts out with 10 days of winter and then turns into an endless spring. The central area you start on is pretty resource rich and has a lot of small spider dens, but all of the things will be on outlying areas that are only connected to the center by dangerous bridges. You'll see what I mean in a minute. But other than that, it's a pretty straightforward chapter, so we'll move through it pretty quickly. After getting a few basic supplies in the starter area, it's time to start moving up the coast, and almost right away I find my first land bridge, one that's infested with lots of level 2 and 3 spider dens. I just run past it for now and surprisingly find that there's another mini bridge ahead that leads to a rocky land, so I might be able to avoid the spider infestation altogether. I mine one boulder, but I'm getting cold, so I head back to the mainland and drop a campfire to get warm. I probably should have just burned a tree, but oh well. Since I was able to get some stone, I go ahead and make a visor, chop a few more trees, warm up again at the fire, and then continue exploring, finding Chester almost immediately. Can't complain about that luck. As with the last chapter, having Chester so early will be very nice, as I won't be using a backpack in order to stay warm with the puffy vest. Chester gets a bunch of spiders interested in him during the night, and then I double back to inspect my second bridge, the Tentacle Maze. Much less dangerous with the giant warning symbols above each tentacle, courtesy of Wagstaff's spectacles. A minute into dusk, I find the third bridge, a Tallbird Gauntlet, which usually isn't too hard to just run through. And nearby is the fourth and final bridge, a chessboard with clockworks. And looks like the clockworks and spiders don't get along with each other, fine by me. In this chapter, I like to set up a small central base of operations, so I fully map out the interior of the central island, and just as I'm finishing, come across what was probably a bee mine set piece that was triggered by the spiders. While the arachnids are busy with the bees, I break one of the nearby dens, then break another and take out the remaining spiders. It's nice to have your base not too close to any dens, so they don't harass you during the excessively long dusk. With the area secure, I place a fire pit, crock pot, and ice box, and also place a storage chest and then start tidying up a bit. The bee-box blueprint gives me a nice 15 sanity boost, though I'll likely never bother making one here, and then a little bit into day 3 I make some infroggles. Wood gets topped up, and then I go and take out a Tallbird, so I'll have the meat needed to make a ham bat. Since it's winter, it will last a good long while and will be much better than a spear. After making another dish of meatballs, I'm ready to head out to the exterior areas and decide to start with the sneaky bridge by the spider area. This area is mostly a mix of rocky land and swamp, and early on day 4 I find my first thing, the crank thing. Because you never know if one area will connect to another more distant area, I map out the rest of the coastline, but there's nothing here, so I head back to camp. After a brief pit stop to warm up, restock my logs, and make some more meatballs, it's off to the Tentacle Maze. The biggest trick to this one is just making sure that Chester doesn't get stuck on one of the turns, and that neither of you get spanked too much. Definitely wear armor when passing through. We make it through just fine though, and find even more swamp on the other side, as well as an oddly placed frozen pond. The presence of bee and killer beehives across a small bridge indicates that this might be a multi-themed area, so I head past the bees and start to pick up a signal, finding the box thing early on day 5. Signal frequency goes back to low though, so I map out this area and then head back to the swamp on the other side of the bees. Once I'm on the far side of the swamp, I pick up another signal, but as I continue along the coast it gets weaker again. Most likely it was picking up something on an adjacent but unconnected area that's past the Tallbird Gauntlet. After burning a few trees to get nice and warm, day 6 arrives, visor goes on, and it's back through the Tentacle Maze with Chester in tow. He keeps up nicely, then it's another quick pit stop at base to make more meatballs, then I'm off through the Tallbird Gauntlet. The only time this one is really dangerous is if you accidentally run into a dead end and then get ambushed by following Tallbirds. Luckily, this one is a straight shot through, and I find a rocky land on the other side that has more Tallbirds. A few boulders get mined, as I'm thinking I'll want to take a stack of stone with me to the next world, as I'll want it for making infroggles right off the bat, as Chapter 5 is always darkness. Soon I've got more than enough stone, so it's back to thing hunting. A savanna head contains at least one McTusk camp, but as I'm cold now and there aren't any trees around, I back off and drop a campfire to warm up. Further ahead is an uncommon set piece that has a fire pit and a bird cage surrounded by walls. I briefly consider stocking up on bacon and eggs, but decide it's probably not necessary. Food usually isn't too much of a problem in adventure mode, so long as you keep moving and forage constantly. The thing is close though, and as night falls I come across Clockworks and the wooden circle thing. Morning arrives, visor goes on, and handbat downs the Clockworks, thereby securing the area. I go ahead and place the box and crank things to free up some inventory space, then continue the search. I don't pick up the signal for anything else though, and suspect that the last two things will be past the Clockwork bridge anyways. Quick run through the Tallbirds, I then run straight through the Clockwork bridge, and then find some trees on the other side to burn for warmth. Oscillations start getting louder just before finding a field of Maxwell's tooth traps with more swamp on the other side. But I circle the swamp without finding it, so I head back inland and finally find the ring thing in a forest just after day 8 arrives. One more to go. Mapping the exterior of the rest of the forest doesn't lead anywhere else, but I see a small section of land past the swamp and wonder if there is something else back there. Turns out just to be more forest but no things, so I outlined the rest of the swamp just to be sure, and yeah, that was a big waste of time. No thing was there. Quick jog back through a few war zones to the trap field, I find a Houndmount area that leads to a savanna as the signal finally gets strong and day 9 arrives. About a minute later, the metal potato thing is located. Per protocol, I go ahead and map out the rest of the area so as to avoid being called Suslindrak, activate a touchstone guarded by Beefalo, then run past a couple of hounds playing with spiders, find a Tallbird fortress, and finish outlining the area. Soon I'm back at base where cooked green caps get my sanity back up, meatballs get made to fill my belly, and then a few trees get burned so I can pre-craft another crockpot. It might not be needed at all in Chapter 5, which mostly follows a linear pathway, but better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. A final round of meatballs gets cooked up, then it's off past the Tallbirds to finish the chapter. Up at the wooden circle thing, I grab some gears to make another icebox, assemble the teleportado while Chester catches up, then mine a few more boulders to replenish the stone a bit. I eat the last meatballs, gobble a green cap, then load up the machine with rocks, gold, walking stick, and pigskins, then hit the button to activate and travel to Chapter 5, Darkness, which, along with the epilogue, we'll do in the next and final episode of the Wagstaff series. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!